Hello and good afternoon to session 3 of the first day of the Big Data Forum 2021. My name is Serjan Jeric. I'm the team leader of the Resident Coordinator's Office here in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is my great pleasure to be able to welcome you to session 3, which is titled The Future of Pharmacy, the Business Case of Medl. We are very pleased and delighted to be able to welcome the Medl developers, Mr. Kiran Mohammed and Mr. Edward Inglefield here to join us for a short presentation, followed by a Q&A session with all the participants. Just as a way of introduction, Mr. Kiran Mohammed is a social entrepreneur and the co-founder of Medl, the winner of the IDB Lab Latin America COVID-19 Challenge and the first Caribbean company to be selected for Microsoft for startups. Kiran has worked in various positions prior to this as a columnist for Trinidad's Newsday, the largest newspaper in the country. He's a World Economic Forum Global Shaper and has worked as a development economist and a former banker at Citigroup. Most recently, he has served as part of the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister's COVID-19 Roadmap to Recovery Transformation Subcommittee. Mr. Edward Inglefield is a co-founder of Medl. As a former chef, Edward has successfully started his baking company, the Brown Bag Baking Company, and he has started one of the first vegan restaurants in the Caribbean, Barefoot Bistro, in 2013. He has also worked for a Caribbean advertising company, Touchpoint, on tech solutions for advertising, as well as marketing at Carib Brewery and as an apprentice at Mercedes-Benz. He has featured prominently in print and television media and has presented on nutrition and wellness at the University of West Indies. Gentlemen, welcome very much to the United Nations Big Data Forum 2021. As I said, it's a great pleasure to have you here, and I'll hand over the floor to you. For all the participants, please be aware that you can post questions for Kiran and Edward at any moment using the Q&A option that you see there. I will keep monitoring and I will be asking them the questions. Following their short presentation, we will enter into a free and open discussion. So without any further ado, over to you guys. Thanks.
No, well, thank you very much and really appreciate it. The way we thought that we'd sort of run through this morning, this fantastic session, which we're very excited to present on, is actually to keep it a bit more interactive as well. I think we've all been through I think our share of wonderful Zoom presentations. So actually the way we thought that we'd do this is actually to sort of pose a series of questions, right, and kind of sort of begin with a few and kind of like keep it like a dialogue in that way. So the way I'll kick it off, I'll actually turn to my co-founder Edward. So Ed, I'd like to sort of pose you this question, right, to begin with. So healthcare, as you know, as we talk about all the time, it generates a huge amount of data daily, right? I mean, about 80% of every diagnosis that is successfully completed is as a result of the patient history. So the more data generated about a particular diagnosis, the easier it becomes for healthcare professionals. I mean, how do you see the future of healthcare, not just pharmacy, right, being more efficiently delivered through digital technology and digitization to be able to use that data effectively to improve care?
Right, thanks, Kiran. Thanks for putting me on the spot instantly. Thanks again to everybody for being here. Thanks for inviting us. Pleasure to be here. So Kiran asked a really good question there, and that's a really poignant question in terms of the actual work that we do at Medl as well. We really aiming to sort of transform the patient experience by creating efficient systems and creating processes that can actually maximize the effectiveness of the care that patients receive. We actually started the process of Medl by digging into data and finding out what the actual issues were that patients were actually coming up against when they were trying to fill their prescriptions. One of the biggest data points that we discovered was that 50% of prescriptions are never actually filled. So Medl became the medium by which we would sort of tackle that immense sort of global problem, because it's not just a Trinidad-based issue. This is a global issue that this data point is based on. And we looked at four different areas where we would sort of address that. The first one was time. Time was a difficult thing for people to manage. They couldn't get the time that it would take to get their prescription was not something they had. Sorry, not something that they had available to them. The other thing was access. People can't access their medication, so therefore they don't therefore take their prescription. The other thing was cost. Cost is a huge factor, and frankly, prescription medication is expensive and difficult to justify for a lot of people. But once you then sort of look at that and say, okay, well, I can reduce the cost of your medication, you then have a situation where people are far more receptive to actually completing their prescription and actually going through with their course of treatment. And the final one, which is actually a really critical one, and something that both myself and Kiran, being non-medical, really take a lot of substance from, and that is actually education, and actually the knowledge of actually what your medication does, how it works, and the information you can actually gain from the interaction with your healthcare provider, with your pharmacist, and other elements of your care cycle. So all of these elements were sort of built out into process that sort of became Medl and the platform that we developed to do that. But just to go back to your question, Kiran, there are so many ways that data can be utilized to sort of increase the efficiency of healthcare delivery. One way is with a platform such as Medl. I mean, the other ways are by sort of building out robust systems that can actually track and manage patients' healthcare. As you said, 80% of diagnoses are based on patient history. And coming from a developing world context, in many cases, we don't have that information. You know, we hear stories of you have a story that you told me recently where you heard of somebody who went in to be treated in public system, and they didn't have their medication details. They didn't have their history, the history of their illnesses or any of their underlying conditions, and they were going to be treated with a medication that would actually have caused a major complication and potentially could have led to their deaths. So we have a case here where we're looking at this sort of massive issue that can be sort of easily solved. I mean, I say that in kind of loosely, easily solved by implementing systems that are based on sort of smart, sort of developed processes that hit areas that people are constantly sort of coming up against. And one of the major issues there is obviously this sort of what we're calling a lack of data, which is essentially a lack of standardization or a lack of ability to sort of transfer data from one person to another or from one entity to another. And it can be sort of solved, as I say, with the implementation of good systems.
Yeah, and this has actually come up, right, Ed, whereby, so the conversation very much in the developing world around data is a different conversation than is happening in the developed world. And the reason is because we have a different set of problems, right? A lot of their problems that they're looking to solve there, they already are looking ahead. They have large data sets. They have clean data sets, right? In many, many cases. So what they're simply looking is, all right, how can we use machine learning to actually pull from this data set? How can we build on this data set? Whereas a lot of what we have had to do, even as entrepreneurs, even as folks who are starting out saying, all right, well, how are we using data to change healthcare and to totally transform healthcare in the region? Actually, one of the biggest problems we have faced, right, is that there is no form of clean data, right? It is extremely difficult because you have data housed in multiple different formats. And when I say formats, I don't just mean digital formats, right? In our case, what we have found, right, Ed, is that it's about 80% of all of the doctors using our platform. We are the first type of software they're using ever. So that data exists, but it exists in big stacks of paper, unfortunately. Now the problem is that then leads to life and death situations like the one you described. You have where I can share actually sort of to the audience a personal story. A few months ago, my father, who runs quite a lot, was running around the savannah, and he tripped and fell and had a concussion. So we had to take him. We took him to the emergency room, and we took him there, and he was totally concussed. But he also has a number of he also has a heart condition. He's taking a number of heart medications, etc. And the doctors asked us. They said, okay, we want to treat him, we want to give him this medication, but we don't know if anything will interact with what with what he's on. And we, of course, we didn't know what he was on, right? We had just taken him there. He had that information, but he was concussed. So that was actually a real world situation, and this it kind of like brings it home. If, for example, they were using the Medl platform, right? And I saw this like instantly. If the physicians had been using the software, they would have been able to pull the data about my father's medication history from one of his other doctors who were on the platform, and that would have dramatically changed how they would have treated him in the moment. But going back to that point of like, how do we actually get this dirty data? This data, which is in many ways kind of in analog forms, how do we actually pull that together, both in the public sector and in the private sector, Ed?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point, because we faced that sort of head on, you know, and in many ways, the way that we sort of addressed our sort of this positive data, which again, I don't want to say that the data is lacking, as Kiran was saying. The data is there. It's just inaccessible and difficult to sort of sift through, right? And I think that's one of these ways, and you can speak to this as well, Kiran, is that we actually just had to kind of bootstrap it. You know, we did the dirty work and collected the data ourselves, and we saw this as not just a necessary sort of evil to sort of go through to sort of develop the processes that Medl was sort of based on, but also in a way to actually expand the sort of data availability for other stakeholders. You know, we've not just sort of collected all this data, sort of built out our models, built out our processes, you know, use a lot of the data. I mean, a lot of it has been quite analog, actually, in some cases, where we actually make phone calls, call somebody up, find out how their experience was with the platform. But to get to the point, we actually were able to sort of use some of this data to actually pass it on to our partners. You know, some of our partners are big corporate clients and big corporate entities, sorry, and they're actually able to say, okay, well, I see the business case for your platform, because I can see that from the data you've collected and you've pulled from various elements, is now sort of, I can build that actually into my business model. So there's a lot to be said about this lack of data and this inability to access data, especially for innovators who are coming into the market with potentially real beating ideas, but they're sort of hit with this sort of brick wall of, how do I say I'm going to prove the concept that I'm actually trying to push? How do I say that my solution can actually be a world beater without actually having in my hand or in my possession the data to back that up? And you can't go to the bank with sort of, well, I think it's good, I think it could work. You have to go with hard numbers. And we were actually lucky enough to sort of be able to sit down and actually pull from our network. You know, we spoke to hundreds of doctors, we spoke to hundreds of patients. You know, as I said previously, you know, we're not technical, but neither are we medical. So we had to be very, very humble and sort of go out there and sort of assume nothing and really not take anything for granted, and pull this data together and really sort of build the groundwork for what sort of developed the Medl platform. And you can definitely add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that really comes back to what we talk about every day, right? And what everyone here at this conference, we are incredibly, for example, why are we having a big data forum in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean? The reason is because the problems, again, not to harp on this, but are very different that we face in the developing world in terms of being able to process that data. And I think it comes down to exactly what you were saying, Ed. And that is where we have both been aligned from the very beginning. And I would tell the audience, the only way we can actually effectively get data to be put in any kind of coherent format is by giving value to those who are providing the data. We can't just expect folks to just sort of provide their data. And that means, by the way, any kind of stakeholder. In our case, we're talking about patients and physicians. However, maybe you're in a government department and you want another government department to provide you with some form of data. I think the key thing, and that we were sort of laser focused on, as well as coming from an entrepreneurial space, is how are we giving value to people in the very first instance? Which is, so in our case, what we did is that we connected doctors and patients with insurance companies and the pharmacist, enabling doctors to electronically prescribe medication and patients to then order that medication, which we then delivered directly to the patient at no additional cost and covered by their insurance. And what that's doing is it's saving them time, it's improving physical access, it's improving the level of education about healthcare and medication, and it's also reducing costs. Ultimately, in a nutshell, what that's doing is providing value for everyone, all of the stakeholders in the chain. And once you provide value in the first instance, then you also create trust, because we're seeing worldwide there is a trust gap, particularly between the most vulnerable, who are the ones that we want to be able to use data with to help, right? But they're the ones who are most distrustful of technology and most distrustful, particularly in cultural contexts in the developing world like ours. So I think it's absolutely critical that we here in the audience acknowledge and are sort of upfront with the creators of the data, and actually provide them with that value actually before even sort of collecting and processing the data, which then will lead to more value. But really, it's about building that chain of trust.
Yeah, definitely, Kiran. I agree with you 100%. And again, that's something we speak about a lot. You know, I think that people or sort of the public in general is sort of very keen to sort of jump on maybe a social media platform and sort of sign away so sell the farm in the TNCs, and the only real value they get from that is maybe saving a few clicks to buy a vacuum cleaner or something that they may have wanted to purchase, you know, and all these sort of revenues and the value from that goes towards the actual person who's collected the data in the first place. But if you can actually take the data that was sort of collected or provided by the individual or by the group and say, okay, well, I can now say to this person or this group of people that I can actually generate real value for you, whether that is intrinsic value or whether it's you know, actual sort of savings of money or various ways you can actually utilize this data to give you direct value. I think that there's a real sort of like sort of golden opportunity there to say, okay, well, we can actually say that to you very directly, or you the stakeholder very directly, and give you and let you see the tangible value from your data, rather than sort of this sort of I guess I don't want to use the term, but the sort of exploitative sort of relationship that people currently have with their own data and the data that they're providing to various stakeholders.
Right, and I think another part of that as well is, you look at healthcare, but this actually exists across any field, and you hear lots of obstacles. Like, for example, we were on a session with the Ministry of Digital Transformation yesterday, and one of the obstacles, we were hearing people in particular ministries saying that it was impossible to get folks in other ministries to share data with them. It's not that the technology is lacking. The technology has existed for years and years, very easy. Like, it really is, what it has been lacking is, I think, the integration of the understanding of the political economy as well, and the understanding of, okay, well, what are the incentives? And kind of like quelling people's fear. A lot of people are afraid. Even many in healthcare, for example, in some hospitals, if you say, if the brilliant folks who are in the audience now said, okay, we're going to go into the regional health authorities and we're going to go into the healthcare system here. We're gonna pull all of your data, and we're gonna say, okay, what are the percentage success rates for particular operations by doctor? Guess what? A lot of doctors are gonna get real, they're gonna get real worried about that. Because they're going to be like, oh my gosh, is this data going to show that, what if I'm below the average, right? Will I be fired? Will I be demoted? And that is a big part of the obstacle, kind of getting past that fear. So it also, I think, when we go in as technologists, as data scientists, we cannot lose sight of that from the very beginning. And that's why anyone working with data, and whether that's in the private sector, that was a public sector example I gave, but the same dynamic happens in the private sector. We need to be able to go in upfront and say, well, hang on, this is the framework of how the data will be analyzed, and also this is how it's going to be used, and saying, okay, even and to some extent almost give some assurances to folks and say, all right, look, we're going to be tracking the data and it's going to show, and guess what, there's a curve, right? It's along the normal distribution, most likely. There's a curve. There are some people who are going to be shown as bad doctors. That is the reality. But say, okay, you're not going to be punished for this. All we're doing is saying, all right, if you adopt these practices and processes, you're going to improve. And if anything, we'll reward you for this, not punish you based on the data.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just wary of the time, and I know that certain that we have
Yes.
Q&A section. I don't know if we should continue going if you have any specific questions.
How are we doing with time?
Yes, yeah. we're doing well with time. What do you call it? That was very stimulating and a very innovative way also of doing the presentation. So I would also like to thank you for sparing us a Zoom PowerPoint. I think we all had way too many of those in the last 2 years. So in many ways, but I would just like to move on to some other questions, and I would like to invite participants also to use the Q&A chat to pose questions. I have one there already. I will ask that first, then I'll go to some of the questions that I have also prepared. But the question that we have from the audience is the solution to this multifaceted patient data problem a national electronic medical record system? What is preventing this from being established?
Ed, do you want to go there? And
sure, and yeah, I mean, Kiran sort of touched on that very briefly. That's one of the real sort of barriers to that is really this sort of idea that there'd suddenly be accountability in the across the sort of ecosystem, right? And I think that's generally people sort of fear that in our market and sort of culturally there is that sort of barrier to get past. But further that, I can't really see there being any real barriers. I mean, it makes absolute sense that there should be a national sort of health records system. It would save so much time, so much money. There would be so much more efficiency in the system. It would allow, as Kiran had mentioned previously, that situation with his dad, that would not exist in a situation where we had a national healthcare sort of network that sort of tracked people's diagnoses and track their medications and all these various elements of their healthcare cycle. But yeah, the real barrier there is just execution. I think that really is the biggest issue. And I'm sure, Kiran, you can add to that as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, execution is a big part of it. Yeah, some of it is, there's a mixture of things. Some of it is sort of like bringing folks up to speed. Healthcare, by the way, is probably the biggest lag in digital adoption. Obviously, COVID has dramatically changed this globally, but healthcare has always been the slowest to adapt to any kind of digital technology. There has always been a lag. Some of that is a reason, right? I mean, there's a saying that they have in Silicon Valley, which is move fast and break things. Well, you can't move fast and break things in healthcare, right? Because the things you're breaking are people. But nevertheless, the reality is that I think a lot of it also is when you're dealing with expert level folks who are absolute experts in their own particular field. And you'll see this across any, it's not unique to healthcare. Maybe you'll see it perhaps in the legal field or in other fields, right? You know, anywhere where people have devoted maybe 10, 15 years to becoming the absolute best surgeon, right? Or the absolute best at what they do. And then you from the outside as a technologist are coming and saying, hang on, this is going to improve what you're doing. And then you run up against frankly, that ego, right? I mean, that has been built up over that. And that is definitely a big part of it, sort of people saying, all right, we need to just be constantly leveraging. Technology is not a threat to us. It's actually just going to help us improve our medical practice. That's one side of it. The second side, as Ed said, is I think just a lot of cutting through the red tape is necessary, right? And the structure of our organizations don't make that easy. It's fantastic, for example, on this conference that we've seen so many, senior ministers join, which is, I think, really, really positive. Even from the prime ministerial level downwards, we've seen, a lot of really positive remarks about technology, and hope that helps. But yeah, I think a lot of it is we need to just cut through that and execute. As we know, Trinidad has never lacked plans. We are fantastic at putting together strategic plans. We could probably export strategic plans. But execution, someone to actually do the boring day-to-day work. Like, for example, most of what Ed and I do are not fun panels like this to the UN. It's just sort of really grinding away and getting things done. And that is honestly what is required.
Yeah.
Great, thank you so much. And we're getting more questions from the audience. So I'll just move on to the next one, since we have only about 15 more minutes to go. One question is, how do you trust the sources of data input though? For example, in instances of corruption, how is data validated? People can simply lie. So how do you get around that when it comes to trusting the sources of the data that you receive?
Right. So, I mean, to use the old Russian proverb, right? Proverai no dovrai. I'm probably butchering that, but trust but verify. Right. And a big part of that, certainly in healthcare, is where you have multiple actors involved. You may have the physician involved, but you also have the pharmacist involved, and then you have the patient, and all of these folks are inputting different types of data. And so cross-verification, having that make and that check is key. But the second side of it is also incentives, right? If you can, and it goes back to providing the value. If folks know, hey, if I actually accurately report the side effect from this medication, maybe the doctor's gonna switch my medication to one where I'll have fewer side effects and I'll feel better. So I have an incentive to accurately report something.
Yeah, and I'll just back up what Kiran said. It's really just a matter of people seeing the value in actually submitting or giving their data to a process, and really seeing the outcomes of that being beneficial to them. You only really see the instances of sort of fraud or people lying about their data when they're actually not seeing real value, or some element of that. So Kiran really hit the nail on the head. There really is a matter of sort of allowing people to recognize the true value in their data, and shifting that sort of I guess that seat of power of the data holder from the actual person who's collecting the data to the person who actually is submitting the data, and who owns the data ultimately.
Thank you very much. Yes, and good Russian as well, Kiran. That was impressive. How you call it? Just to move on to the next question. How is Medl approaching the question around data security and the risks around that, and the concerns that users may have about their data being used and for what purposes? That I think is sort of goes beyond Medl, right? I think it's everybody's big concern, but just in your case, what has been your approach?
So I can speak to that briefly. I mean, so from the very beginning, we sort of approached that from the perspective of we wanted to create a data standard that was far beyond what we had in the local market. So we looked at standards such as HIPAA, GDPR, as various things to build those into our processes. So to really ensure that any data we do collect, I mean, healthcare data is extremely sensitive data. Any data we do collect is really well managed and really well taken care of from a security perspective, but also from a sovereignty perspective as well. and keeping that data as well put together as possible. In terms of sort of the actual use of that data and how we sort of then extract value for the consumer or customer from that data, we obviously use all the best practices in terms of anonymity and anonymizing the data when required. So that's a very boring approach to that. That's not a very fun element of it, but it is very necessary, and it is, as Kiran was saying previously, trust is a massive issue, especially in this market. I think we ranked like bottom of the barrel in terms of trust, the trust index, and really sort of getting past that was one of the major elements with us sort of getting the product out to the end user, both on the doctor and the patient side, actually. And it is really something that we've had to really tackle from the beginning. So it really is something we're very committed to, and something we're very we keep very high on the totem pole in terms of order of priority.
Yes, and that includes hiring lots of Ukrainian hackers to pen test our systems. Yeah. Yeah. So, but also, I'll actually answer. I saw there was actually a second question, but I think it's almost like a second part of this question. How do you see distributed ledger tech playing a part in healthcare? And I think that actually ties into the question around data security that Ed just mentioned. I think that's really very exciting, and certainly something that we are exploring very heavily, where we can use two things, both tokenization and blockchain technology. And there are lots of other people, which is fantastic, who are working to solve the problem of digital ID, digital health ID, and tokenization. And it through also lots of sort of fun things like zero knowledge proofs as well, which will basically will allow people to totally protect their data, but also to interact with other platforms in a way where sort of value can still be extracted for both themselves. They can be compensated, as well as for the other organizations to help drive research forward.
Thank you. We have 3 more questions in the Q&A so far. We have about 8 more minutes left. So let me just go into the next one that I see. Is the Medl platform developed with local engineers or foreign developers? How capable have you found local engineering talent to develop technologies and products such as Medl?
I can kind of touch on that. So the basis of the Medl platform was actually developed by foreign engineers. So we built it out utilizing a foreign team. But as we sort of developed the platform further and sort of expanded the feature base of the platform, we have used local developers as well to do that. For the most part, we've seen that the local developers are quite proficient. They've been able to do the jobs that we've asked them to do. But there is a real gap there. What we've found is that while there are a lot of very good developers who are quite senior and therefore in a startup context quite expensive, but there is this sort of gap where we don't see that sort of middle ground, where there's that sweet spot where you can say, okay, well, I can bring in some developers to come and do a job for me, and it won't cost me half the business essentially to get the job done. But they will do quite a good job because they may be relatively experienced but maybe not as experienced as a very senior developer. But that is changing. We are seeing that there are sort of programs, there are people coming into the space. There are a lot of young developers who are kind of up and coming, who just don't have the experience at present to really sort of like bang out really super top quality code with sort of on their own. They would need a lot of sort of oversight and guidance on that. But yeah, so to just answer the question, we sort of have used a mix. Our last sort of group of developers one was Ukrainian and one was based in India. While also having a local tech consultant who's a trainee as well, who was assisting us there as well. So it has been a mix, and we've sort of seen various benefits from various developers. But overall, the local developers have been quite good to us.
Yeah, and Vijay, I would, would love to. We would love to, at another occasion, hear your war stories about that. For those in the audience who don't know, Vijay is sort of well known for having built one of the a fantastic sort of world-class company using local developers surrounding robotics. So I'm sure we would definitely value your advice at some point.
I think you can join Vijay for his presentation this afternoon, in case you want to. I mean, you can return the favor at 3:30 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. But staying with the topic of development and developing it, we have another question, which is to get your program off the ground. One user is asking, how did you guys go from paper to data?
Oh, that's a huge question. I know we don't have much time, so I'll try and answer it very
4
quickly.
minutes, so no pressure. Yeah.
Sure. It took a long time. So that's the sort of the short answer. It took a long time to sort of translate what was essentially an idea into this sort of end-to-end platform that sort of really encapsulates so many sort of elements. There's not only the healthcare element, but there's also a logistics element. There's a e-commerce element. We have to manage a dispensary on the ground. So I mean, there's a lot of elements that sort of had to come to play to get this platform up and running. I think that the key to that, really and truly, again, myself and Kiran coming from sort of outside both spaces, both the healthcare and the technology space, was really getting the knowledge or reaching out to those that had the knowledge that we didn't have, and be very, very open to that knowledge as well. I think both myself and Kiran are very sort of problem focused. We see a problem, we want to solve it. Medl is the current solution, or some sort of amalgamation of Medl is the current solution that we see solving the problem we see in front of us, which is the idea that 50% or the fact, sorry, that 50% of prescriptions are never filled. However, we're not we're not bedded in with any sort of specific process. We're very willing to adapt and change, and we don't sort of like tie ourselves down to any idea. And that does sort of come from our sort of this willingness to want to solve a problem rather than sort of create a solution. We obviously want to create a very good solution as a key element to what we're doing. But the real idea here is to create the solution that is best fit for the problem that we're trying to solve. And you do that by speaking to the people who are sort of facing the problem, people who are actively solving the problem on the ground, or who are essentially the sort of the end users of the current system that's just broken and they don't get the value from. So yeah, speak to experts and be very humble.
Thank you. And we have time just for one more question, which is also the last question that we have in our Q&A, which is, how do you see DLT tech playing a part in healthcare, helping to solve issues around verification, validation, and security?
So I think I touched on that a little bit earlier on. Again, to kind of elaborate, that's a whole very exciting session in and of itself. But I'll say one key thing, right? One of the biggest problems we have in healthcare, not just in Trinidad or in developing countries, but globally, is the problem of interoperability in health systems. That's a huge challenge, that you have all of these different siloed systems, none of them talk to each other. I see someone put in the chat, loss of data and data security, these types of things. And I think it's very clear that blockchain technology, at least as it pertains to sort of digital ID, can go a long way to solving that. For example, if someone had a digital health wallet with all of their health information, and that token, if you will, could just talk to any system. It would talk to Medl one day, maybe it'll talk to someone else's system, and that would seriously go a long way to solving that problem. Also from a security standpoint as well, I think what we are going to increasingly see is, guys, we are living in the world where gene editing is perfectly possible, but also living in a world where bioweapons are very clearly possible as well. So being able to sort of protect that both in a strongly encrypted fashion, but in a fashion where there's sort of very easy means of verification is key. What I will say, one of the challenges with that right now is quite simply the transaction costs of a lot of blockchain transactions are too high. But that is rapidly coming down once you see the sort of wonderful innovations, again, with zero knowledge proofs and others that are happening, for example, on the Ethereum chain, that we are seeing those transaction costs and sort of the evolution of proof of stake coming down very rapidly. So we're really excited about that. Hey, I really hope that the next billion-dollar company that solves that comes out of Trinidad as well. So I hope that someone here does that.
Great. Thank you so much for this very fun and very engaging session. I would also like to thank our audience for the stimulating questions that we have had. We are unfortunately out of time now. In 10 minutes time, the next session of the Big Data Forum is coming up. It's with Microsoft Caribbean, so please do join that. It starts in 10 minutes time. But for now, Kiran and Edward, thank you so much. And we certainly hope to be in touch in the future as well, because we would love to continue to work with Medl and to engage with you guys, engage you guys in the work that the UN also does here in Trinidad and in the wider Caribbean. Thank you all so much. Please continue to enjoy the Big Data Forum 2021. All the best.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.